began to discover some other zone of consciousness. That is why we are really distinguished from the other, if you like, apes and so on. But we're not following that. And we separated it. This is spiritual matter. Now this is a church issue or a mosque issue. Once you begin to separate it, then we are broken down. We become schizophrenic. But I am both. I am a human. Once my human side is fulfilled, my body is in reasonable state, my mind is reasonably, clear, and so on. Then I want to know what else, what next. And if I don't go to the transcendental of it, I become greedy. I become, I create chaos as we are doing. Most of our, wealthier people could have stopped much earlier in accumulating and being abusive and being unjust by caring for themselves. But no, control, control, control. I feel I'm totally under control. But I don't attempt to control. If it is given to me something to control, put this there, so I will do it. Minimal. So the question of decree and destiny, to what extent am I free, or to what extent it is predestined? I am free only in limited situations. I am free to speak or not to speak, or few things. But I'm not free to say that if I do this and this and this, in 5 years' time I'll be the happiest man on earth. No way. I will never be. There are so many new factors that comes that will change my destiny. So these are the things that we need to be shown or taught as kids, but we are not. So we have ended up by having few rituals, and therefore it becomes divisive. More sectarian, more this, more and more. They're not exactly the same. The otherness. The Quran says, not until you treat your enemy as your closest friend. Not until then. You're not near enough to be awakened as to who you really are. Once you discover that, then you find everybody else potentially is the same. Everybody is a spirit or a soul. They are divine, but they don't know. They have not had the same opportunity. So you have maybe occasionally some empathy, sympathy, or if there isn't anything you can do, you don't do it. But there will be justice in that. You treat everybody as potentially the same.
So on this lower level of what you call, I think, limited or conditioned consciousness, which is the consciousness that one has when one deals with what is called the outer world, the material world, the tools that you have. It has enormous defenses. It has created all kinds of ramparts around it that would make it difficult, not difficult, but at least these ramparts in the mind or in the experience of the individual are real. The ramparts come in various shapes and forms, all of them designed to make the person unwilling or incapable of acknowledging the absolute, the other zone. These ramparts are one's experience of space, one's experience of time. Also the way it's filtered through the intellect, through reason and logic, which can only understand the language of causality. And on the collective side, culture, nations, ethnicities play their part in confining and constricting. And on the individual side, there's also the element of mind, which has been deconstructed into psychology, into emotions, into sensuality, and all of that. So you have all of these fortresses that modern man, it seems, has built to eliminate in his experience or her experience the traces of the sacred. Let's call it the traces of the sacred. And each one of these fortresses is massive in one's own cognition of it in the context of limited consciousness. You said that the mind has to be shifted because it is the point, the narrowest point in which everything is funneled. The illusory reality of these obstacles are nevertheless real for those enmeshed in limited or conditioned consciousness. So the trigger in your case may have been everything came to a point when you saw it embodied in the person of Chiang Mai, for example. Before that, there were stirrings and yearnings and glimpses and so on. But it took on a channelized form. The notion of the sacred, which has been deconstructed in the mind of modern man, is essential to bring the person the potential to actualize what you experience. Would you agree on that?
I agree with you entirely, except I would also put it in a slightly different frame. I don't need to have the notion of the sacred to seek the absolute. I need to suffer from my day-to-day life. I need to suffer from the inadequacy. I need to suffer from my vacancy. I need to suffer from my not being truly, deeply, sustainably content. That will drive me.
Would you say exhaustion?
Yes,
suffering leading to exhaustion.
A deep, subconscious, if you like, exhaustion. Not physical, not literal, not mental or intellectual. But that I know is not enough. And some sense of desperation. I think if young people whom I've come across in my life, who've had a lot of shocks in their teens, later on disappointments and failures, I think they are far more susceptible to discovering the balance between their higher consciousness and the conditioned consciousness and so on. And we gave these names of sacred and so on. As I said, it is only sacred. I only see nothing other than that absoluteness, diluted, and it appears now to be this is the profane or this is the secular. All of it is emanating from the same, sustained by the same, returning to the same. There is none other than that unique, impossible to demystify oneness and sameness. And I'm part and parcel of that. So the less I am of a mind, the less I have my biography, the less I have identity, the less I am fearful or concerned about time. I use these three as a package: mind, identity, and time issue. The more I am likely to begin to see behind, a bit on the horizon, the meaning of events. Otherwise, the events become very brutal. I was sacked. Well, look into the meaning of it. The company is going down, this and that, and I had enmity, there were others. Look at the factors, so it was inevitable. I begin to see order in chaos. And that is closer, if you like, to what you call the sacred. Earlier on in our human endeavors, 3,000-4,000 years ago, everybody looked at events in life through the lens of oneness. Imam Ali says, I don't see anything unless I see the light of God before it, and the light of God in it, and the light of God after it. So you look at diverse issues and events through the lens of oneness. You don't deny otherness or the passage of time, but they'll become far more meaningful and connected. They won't become these haphazard, if you like, issues that causes so many people to feel they are victims. There is no such thing as victim. You were in the wrong place in the wrong time doing the wrong thing. Tough luck. That's about it.
It would seem that you're asking this exhaustion that leads to desperation, in the sense that nothing is satisfying from any self-contained outer system that tries to explain. But at the end of the day, what is left is the stark realization that the only barrier is you. There's the self and its multiple manifestations.
Again, here a language, instead of it being a connector, becomes a barrier. I would not use these. I've tried myself not to use these terms of self-annihilation or fana or death in it. Once I begin to taste an aspect of liberation from that self, the Prophet ﷺ says, your biggest enemy is your own self, within yourself, meaning my ego, meaning my lower self, meaning my self-identity, meaning my biography. So once I've tasted a little bit of something that is more liberating than that, then I can sublimate. I would use the word of transcending, sublimating, going around it. Leave the self. Yeah, they tell you you are such an important person or this and that, fine, let them say it. But I mustn't fall into that pit. You know, I must not, I must be still neutral to whether it is censor or praise. If they praise me, I go up, and if I want constancy, I want stability, my soul is ever constant. So I just go around it, leave it there. And then you look back, you say, fine, it is there, you smile at it. You say, of course I have an ego. How can you not have an ego? But it's the extent of it. Is it a real obstacle towards your awakening? Or has it been a good start even? So I wouldn't use, again, theory of the science of the inner, technology of the inner, can cause more also obstacles. That's why earlier on also in my own life, I would not recommend to people who come to me to read any of these Sufi books. The less the better. Live it, be it, taste it. It is that personal access to it, to the taste of what is emitted from the heart. I think the more we intellectualize about Sufism, about spirituality, I think the more cumbersome it becomes. And then people start pulling ranks. I am of a higher, I've read more, I've done it. So what is in the biggest obstacles then will become also the intellectual side. The mind moves on to a very, very highly refined point. That is more difficult to overcome. That is why I think more simple people, simple-minded people, will develop that inner taste of the delight of being in their heart, of being heartful, than the more educated or the wealthy. I find more people who are amongst the poorer people, not abject and really utter misery, but amongst the poorer people who don't have the luxuries of, quarreling about which holiday should they have where or for how long. They are easier. Generally they are accessible. They are more humane and more human. Or few of those who have gone beyond wealth is no longer there, if you like, oppressing them. They've gone past it. As Imam Ali says about wealth or whatever, he said, it isn't that you shouldn't own anything. Does anything owns you? That is the thing, you see. Zuhud is that, actually. But we hardly live that. We pretend this and we pretend that, and so it doesn't work. It must be total. It must be real.
Models and schemas are appropriate, I think, even in your own teaching experience at an early stage. I mean, now you're not really positing any models or schema, but say 20 years ago, there was the entire panoply of the self and its various components and constituents, and nearly all of it drawn from insights, deep insights into scriptural texts, including the Quran. The pattern of the self as having various degrees, from the commanding self to the blaming self, and so on, reaching the apogee of the contented self. These schemes and these models possibly don't explain the import of what a person is experiencing, and it is best to leave them at a later stage, as you say. But I would have thought that they would be important in terms of trying to reconstruct the idea of self in people who have formulated under different circumstances and conditions. See it in terms of this, let's say, the Freudian self or the Jungian self is not necessarily a useful model to have on the kind of unshedding of your myths that this would call for.
I don't deny the usefulness of these models. If I want to get out of myself, it would help me if I have a bit of a sketch as to what is the self, how does it mislead me, what are the vices and the virtues. So it's very helpful. But equally it's important, whilst I am battling with my vices, whilst I'm beginning to be a bit more aware of how I'm trying to cloak my meanness with a bit of a generosity, or my ignorance with a bit of a knowledge, whilst I'm battling with those subtle ways of the self, because anything in existence wants to perpetuate its existence. So does the self. So do we do it collectively. We want to perpetuate the same myth because it had occurred, so we want to continue. The love and the passion for continuation foreverness is in every aspect of life. So it's important to have a good idea as to how the self operates. But equally, I now emphasize more that this whole thing is an illusion, it's my own invention. Because the real me is a light, which is my soul. So I equally say, yes, read about how the self can disguise itself as a good guy or a good, doing this, helpful. But don't forget, all of this is under the light of a soul or a spirit. Once you begin to have a taste of that also, in other words, say no to the self. Yes, the self is a barrier, the self is a blockage. But once you have a bit of a taste of something much higher, then it will be push-pull, as against just push. The soul will pull me. Say, look, you are this, you have tasted, you know it, so behave. So I will be self-accountable or soul-accountable in that sense. So it will be an autonomic system. There is a great prophetic teaching is that no self will ever get out of its oppressive state unless it has been given a beam of a light from its soul, from outside it. So you begin to, so there has to be a bit of a crack. For that reason also they say you need to have a teacher who may reflect that for you, who may suddenly tell you all of what you're saying is a lot of rubbish. You know, it may work for a short while, but are you ready to die? Are you content to leave this world? Are you genuinely cheerful about departure or cheerful about continuation longer? So one needs a bit of a challenge that is beyond